One of CNN's most recognizable faces is Clarissa Ward, well known for her reportage from the front lines of war and other global events through the years. Our Chief International Correspondent joins us this Women's Month from London. Clarissa Ward, CNN Chief International Correspondent, thank you so much for joining us on The Final Word. You're expecting your third child this coming May. How are you feeling?
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you. I am very excited, obviously, about welcoming a new addition. A little bit concerned about how I'm going to juggle all of it with 3 little boys and a husband, so 4 boys to take care of. But I'm sure we're going to muddle through it, and we're very much looking forward to it.
All right, you said 4 boys. You will be heavily outnumbered. How do you balance your being a broadcast journalist, a mother, and a wife?
It's not easy, and I think you have to be realistic with yourself that you can't be giving 100% to all 3 roles at the same time. Something is always going to get left behind a little bit. And so what I have done is to build up a support network of incredible women who help me with my sons and help me with my home. And I'm fortunate that my parents are very present in our lives as well. And by building a village, so to speak, that really allows me to continue to work and to do this job that I love so much and I have such passion for, and which I genuinely believe in turn makes me a better mother, a better wife, a better friend.
And Clarissa, despite your pregnancy, you were covering the war in Ukraine. How challenging was that? Share with us your experience.
It was challenging for a number of reasons, not so much from the perspective of security, because given that I was heavily pregnant, we were not traveling to frontline areas. We took a lot of care to plot out all the perinatal facilities along the various routes that we were taking, and Ukraine has very good health care, and so I wasn't as concerned about that. But there are more mundane logistical things, like the fact that to drive to Ukraine from Poland is about a 15-hour drive, and that's a long time to be driving when you're heavily pregnant. And then on top of that, you have late nights because it's CNN, and our big audiences are in the primetime hours in the US, which is the early hours of the morning in Ukraine. So it was a very tiring trip, but we felt that it was very important to mark the year anniversary of the invasion and to tell the kinds of stories that we felt really were an important part of the coverage. And so it was a long January and February, but I'm really glad we went.
It has been indeed very trying and challenging for you, being pregnant and in the field, but your passion to be a great storyteller really shines through in all of your stories, Clarissa. Who inspired you to become a journalist?
So it wasn't a particular person, excuse me, who inspired me to become a journalist. It was rather an event. I was in my senior year at Yale University. I was studying comparative literature with a focus on French, Italian, and Russian literature. And 9/11 happened. And as I'm sure you remember, that was a moment where really it felt like the world changed fundamentally on a certain level. And for me, it was a moment where I realized that everything that I had thought was really important before, while it was still important, there were other things that were more important. And I felt a profound sense of shame that I hadn't been more engaged with what was going on in the world, that I hadn't been paying closer attention to some of these very violent undercurrents that were roiling beneath the surface. And I also felt very strongly that I wanted to be some kind of a translator between worlds, to travel to places at the tip of the spear, try to get a better understanding of what was happening there, try to give a better understanding of the perspective of America, because it was also very clear to me that there was a big chasm between how America saw its role in the world and how the rest of the world saw America's role. So that was what really inspired me to become a journalist. I was 22 years old. I had very little sense of what that would entail, but in that moment, I really felt that I had a calling.
And Clarissa, tell us which particular event that you've covered in your entire career as a broadcast journalist so far has left an imprint on you as a journalist.
I think every conflict I have covered has left an imprint, whether that's Iraq, which was the first war that I covered, or Afghanistan, or Syria, which really broke my heart. And Syria, I think, was the war where I was forced to really grow up as a conflict reporter and to think meaningfully about what our role is as conflict journalists and to accept the limitations of that role, essentially. And then more recently, covering Ukraine, but also stories that I've covered all over the world. I covered a terrible earthquake in Indonesia back in 2009, which stayed with me for a long time. I have covered the civil war in Yemen a number of times. And all of these people and places that you visit and that you spend time with, they do leave an imprint on your soul and on your psyche.
And Clarissa, you are a role model for gender equality and women empowerment. What is your advice to women who want to be like Clarissa Ward and succeed as a journalist?
I think the thing I would tell women who want to do this work is that you have to be passionate, you have to be determined, and you have to be a little bit patient. Because there are some jobs in life where there's a clear trajectory for how to get there. So if I want to be a lawyer, I understand that I go to law school and then I try to get a job as a paralegal, and there's a process. Whereas to be an international journalist, there isn't any one set course. There's a number of different ways you can do this, and all of them are very challenging and very competitive. But you have to have faith in yourself and belief in yourself, and you have to just be patient and keep pushing. And I would just say that sometimes there's a temptation, particularly if you go to a good school, you think you graduate and have been told that the world is your oyster, when in reality, for me at least, the first 5 years after I left school were very difficult and very challenging, and I felt very far away from what my real dream was. I say 5 years, it was probably more like 3. But the point being that it does take time. You're not going to graduate from your studies and immediately land where you want to be. And it's important to remember that the journey is part of the story and is part of the destination.
CNN and Chief International Correspondent Clarissa Ward, thank you so much for joining us on The Final Word, and happy Women's Month.